Junior high, senior high, you may go out. Go out the balcony, please, instead of the back hallway. I need for you to go up through the balcony. One thing about this church, you can get there any direction you go. There's a door leading to the place. Deb and I had a very good weekend last week watching our kids in the program, so that was very nice. We were very sorry that we missed ours. First time in 25 years I've missed our Christmas program, and I love my grandkids, so when they said, "Pepple, can you do this?" I did. I told them not to ask next year, okay? It's just too hard for me to be away from here. But anyway, today I want to start a series of sermons on Abraham. We're going to be looking at in a way of a journey. Of course, it was a journey for him, and I want to talk about the journey some, but I wanted to apply to our lives in such a way. Today, life, a journey, and adventure. As we go into this series, I want you to take a hard look at your life, that we're all making a journey, and there's, of course, a physical journey that you're on, but there's also a journey of faith that I want you to be on. And I hope that we're going to be able to draw parallels in the next few weeks between Abraham's journey, or Abram's as he starts out, and our journey. So for 2015, I want you to focus on your journey here on earth. I want you to consider your journey. Not that your journey just physical, but about your faith journey. How much have you grown in your faith? We're going to talk a little bit about that as we go as well. I want you to consider, where did you start? Where did your journey of faith start? Now, I would probably trace mine back to Grandma Pickle. Most of you would know that. She's the first one that started planting seeds. But from there, not the seed planter, but where did it start? When was the first time you remember being in a church? When was the first time you sat and listened to a message? Not when you were there because of the girl down the pew or the boy down the pew, but because you were listening to a message. Where did your journey start? Whenever you felt that God might have a message for you. Then let me ask you to do this. Where are you now? Where are you at in your walk of faith right now? And then where do you want to be? Well, in 2015, I want you to accomplish some of that, and in conclusion, I'll give you some ideas what to do, of where I want you to be with that. As we go into our first point, a journey, and we find out the world is in a mess. There's no doubt that there's the first parallel. Our world is in a mess. It's not much different than it was in the day of Abraham. Our world is in a mess. People's priorities are all out of whack. I think most of us are aware of that. Hatred, riots, shootings, ISIS, Taliban, hunger, poverty. You know, personally, I think it's a disgrace that any of these are taking place. And I think it's terrible that there's any hungry people in our world. It's just not acceptable, but it's the fact. People are confused about God. That's not much different than Abraham's day. In Genesis chapter 3, we're going to see where it starts in verse 23. So the Lord God banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground which he had been taken. Immediately, God turns the garden over to Adam and Eve, and it looks like if there's only two people in the world, you can't get it wrong. They did. Boom! We're in a mess. Now, how long we're in the garden? You know, all those debates about how old this world is it 6,000 or 6 million? Were they in the garden 100,000 years? Or, folks, who cares? And you know, I don't want to offend you, but who cares? What does it really matter if it's 6,000 or 6 million? All I want to know is that God's in control. And if God's in control, I'm quite happy wherever it's at. If He did it, I'm happy with it. So they're in the garden, but all of a sudden two people mess it up. And they're banished from the garden. Well, if two people messed it up, just think what we're doing with billions today. Oh, we're getting in a big mess. So we're just like them. Separation from God and sin, and because of that, we see the same issues today. Genesis chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. After all of this has taken place, we're going to go So the Lord said, I will wipe away the face of the earth, the human race I have created, and with them the animals and the birds and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. In the garden, it was the fall of man. Here, God's ready to start over. He's ready to start over. But because of Noah and one man, he decided not to wipe everything completely out. But because of his righteousness, so he used Noah and his family to start all over again. In Genesis chapter 11, we're going to see that it continues to deteriorate. So the Lord scattered them from there over the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. The Tower of Babel, and this was arrogance. We can look at the Tower of Babel in a lot of different ways, but I think if you really study it, you're going to find that it's just a matter of arrogance. Man has got to the place where they just believe that they're as knowledgeable and as great as God, and they're making every effort to prove it. They're building this tower. They've accumulated the population in one place. I can only imagine the chaos that is going on there. And because of their arrogance, God confused them and sent them all over the earth. In Joshua chapter 24, verse 2, it's going to say this. Joshua said to all the people, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago, your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshiped other gods. The world was filled with gods. See, even our hero today started in a pagan worship, in a false worship, false gods. The false god that they worshipped was the god, moon god. Now, did anyone know what the moon god's name was? Sin. Sin. Now, isn't that appropriate? Sin, the moon god. Well, I think the world in 2015 is in a similar mess today. Not much difference. So I'm going to ask you about your journey. Will you consider a spiritual journey? There's no doubt we can go to Abraham's time and we can see such a parallel with what's going on today. I'm greatly concerned about where our world's at today. Most of us can remember some better days. Maybe it was just because we were younger and everything looked so much better. But we remember what we believed to be better days. We look at those days and we say, wow, I miss those years. Whatever years they were. We miss those years. You know, if you ask my generation, for some of us who were stuck in the 60s, we miss the 60s. For some who were stuck in the 50s, they miss the 50s. For some who were stuck in the 80s, they miss the 80s. I was looking for Virginia. I was going to say for those that were stuck in 1890s, they remember the 1890s. Mary? She's not here, I'm sorry. So you get the idea. The world has changed. But God called Abraham on a journey. A journey God calls Abram. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 will say this. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, your father's house to the land I will show you. The verse, as we read it, there's an awareness that back in chapter 11, verse 32, is when the first call would really go out. And he had called into Abram to make this change. Now that change is going to be very important. But Abram would only go as far as, and it depends on how many professors you've had on how this is going to be pronounced, Haran or Haran. However you want to pronounce it, I don't really care. He's to go that far. That's all the farther that his dad would go. But that's not what God had told him. God said, I want you to go to Canaan. But they stopped. Now, any idea why they might have stopped there? That was the center of the worship center of the moon god. Abram's father was a dedicated moon god worshiper. So they get to this place, and God had given him instructions, leave everything behind and go. But he didn't. His father's with him, and he stays there until his father's death. He will stay and not go until then. They have left Ur of the Chaldeans, Mesopotamia, some would know, present-day Iraq. Haran was the center of worship, as I mentioned. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8, it will say this. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. He didn't know the destination. Somewhere in Canaan is where he was to go. Now I want all of you to take a little trip in your mind. I want you to imagine Abraham is 75 years old. So let's call that middle-aged. So for some of you who are middle-aged or just a little bit over, I want you to consider with me that God comes to you and says, I want you to go to Missouri. I don't know why he would want you to go to Missouri. I can't think of any good reason to go to Missouri. But he wants you to go to, I went to Missouri for Deb, but I don't know why anyone else would go to Missouri. All right, so you're going to go to Missouri. Now where are you going to go? Well, I don't know. I'll let you know when you get there. How many want to make that journey? Not many of us. Not many of us want to set out on a journey where all we know is a vast area, some 6 or somewhere between 500 and 700 miles. I want you to travel and be there. Wow, that's a journey that's a little concerning to me. He said, I want you to go. So he didn't know the destination. So you've made this trip. Where in Missouri are you going to be? You don't know. So no doubt Abraham had great faith in God. He had great faith in however God spoke to him. Now, I'm not for sure how God spoke to him. You can't find that in the Scripture. I'm not for sure why God chose Abram. Evidently, only God knows why he chose him. Devout, dedicated, but it doesn't identify any of those things. But God has selected Abram and says, I want you to go to Canaan. I want you to leave everything behind, and I want you to go. That's a pretty big assignment. The call has conditions. He said you are to leave your country, your people, and your father's house. Now, why did God want him to do that? Well, the best I can come up with is God wants us dependent upon him and not everyone else. Do you ever see anyone who couldn't make it in Christianity because they couldn't let go of their past? They couldn't let go of family that would draw them down? We just had a discussion. How many times do we see situations where we are in this great heroin epidemic, folks? If you're not aware of it, you need to be. It's a terrible epidemic that northern Kentucky evidently is the center of right now. And it's a terrible situation. There are many that I have buried because of it. Just to let you know. It's a terrible, terrible situation. And you know what happens when they get clean? They go back to their old circle of friends. And when you go back to your old circle of friends, you know what's going to happen? It's going to draw you down. It's going to pull you back into it. There's a reason that God has told Abraham, leave everything behind. He doesn't want, first of all, Abraham dependent upon everyone else. He wants him dependent upon God. He doesn't want Abraham being pulled down because, folks, it's hard enough to make it doing God's will when we're just depending upon God. Let alone when we got people that are pulling against us. So Abraham wasn't to take anyone. He had his instructions. So the message had a condition that God has given him. Not friends, not family, not riches. But that makes the decision even harder. Genesis chapter 12 verses 2 and 3 will say this. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all people on earth will be blessed through you. Well, it's a call with a promise. He said, I've got this promise that I'm going to give you. God said, do what I ask and have blessings beyond belief. Now that applies to us as well. If we do God's will, you're going to find your blessings just multiply over and over and over again. You're going to find that God just has a way of working in your life. Genesis chapter 12 verse 5 will say this. He took his wife Sarai and nephew Lot and all the possessions they had accumulated and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. And they arrived there. Abraham was willing to a degree, but doesn't honor all the conditions. Now he doesn't see the problem with that right now. Just like if you make a decision for Christ, there are conditions. We say come just as you are, but you can't stay just as you are. You have to change. You have to start putting Christ first in your life. It's not going to be a quick process, but it's a growing process. And without change, there's failure. So here we've got a situation that is really just quite clear. Abraham didn't do all that God said with the conditions. And because of that, later on in our series, you're going to see where he has some major problems that he has to deal with. There are going to be some real issues that he has to deal with. Problems that are going to come back, because what did he do? Well, he took Lot. He took riches. He took provisions, all on his trip. Today, the main thing I want to do is for you to be introduced to this journey. God is calling each of you to make a journey of faith. You may not see it that way, and that may not be how you will relate it in your mind, but it's a journey of faith that you're going to be on. That's why I want you to find out where you started. I want all of you to think about that this week. I want you to think about your first church experience. I want you to think, was it a good one or a bad one? Was it one that you look back and you smile, or you say, man, it's a wonder I ever went back? It can be either or. What was your first church experience? Abram sets out on his journey, and his first experience wasn't too good, folks. He didn't go far enough. How many of you have started on your faith journey and only went a short distance? You only got as far as the relatives would let you. That's what happened to Abraham. He only got as far as Dad would let him go. And he didn't break the tie. And he had to wait till Dad died before he went on any farther. So how many of you, I want you to look this week at that journey, and how many of you started on that journey and you only got a little ways, just a short distance before family held you back, and you didn't get to go as far as you wanted to go, and you had to wait a period of time. Do you parallel with Abraham in that way? Maybe your life does. All of us who've been on this journey, we can start pinpointing and identifying some of this. It's a journey that God calls you to. Like Abraham, God calls each of us to a journey. For most, God will not call them to leave home, family, and friends. Most of you are probably within a few mile radius of where you've started. If I was to ask for a show of hands how many went to homes, we'd have the vast majority probably went to homes. If I was to ask how many of you have moved in from another state, there wouldn't be many of us. Maybe a few. It's a journey that you have been on. God doesn't call most of you to make any changes. Most of you probably have some friends that you went to school with still very close. God didn't call you to make that change, and there's nothing wrong with that. Unless you need to give those particular friends up to get your life right, then there's a problem. God does call some to do that. We left Illinois, come to Kentucky.
We got blessed.
Thank you. You leave family and friends, and pretty soon, what did God say? If you leave father and mother, I will give you brother and sister. That's what He's done. God calls everyone to a journey of faith, folks. 2015 starts on Thursday. I want you to use this year to chart your spiritual journey. That's what this sermon's all about, is to ask you to chart your spiritual journey. I want each evening for you to consider what your day was like. I don't want you to miss a day. If you do, you'll miss the opportunity to review. I want you to look at that day, and I want you to decide, did I open mouth and insert foot? Anyone else ever do that occasionally? Okay. So thank you. Thank you all for your hands. I appreciate that. I thought it was just Deb. Probably me. So I want you to take each evening and just, I don't care if you don't have to make it a ritual, but take each evening and review your day. And see how your day has been You're calling yourself Christian. How was my day? Did you get aggravated at that guy that cut you off? I saw that on the news the other day. The ladies got cut off, and the lady jumped out of the car and started beating on the window. You know, a mad woman's bad enough, let alone beating on my window. Yeah. So, sure enough, there it was. Then I want you to take each week